Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, and welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. I'm your guest host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst at Sapient Insights Group. And joining me today for the conversation is Tammy Smith, Senior Research Analyst and my data partner in crime. Not partner in data crime. We don't want to get that confused. So thank you, Tammy.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Cliff. I'm so happy to be here today to discuss data in the HR tech field for my first time. You know, I enjoy being your data partner in crime, but seriously, data crime is an interesting subject. Sometimes I do feel like a data police officer, especially with how crafty the survey spammers have gotten over the past few years. All right, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sure we'll chat about these darn spammers soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our goal today is we're talking about data. I know that not always the most exciting topic for everybody, but I do think it is an extremely important subject. And although we're going to be talking about data as it relates to our annual survey and white paper, I think there are some lessons to be learned. Normally on this podcast, we like to talk about the news and what's going on, but we thought we'd mix it up a little bit. With Stacy out, we can get up to some hijinks. And I think that, we really want to make this almost a informational session. We're going to talk about some of the things we ran into and we have run into when it comes to using data. And hopefully some of this will resonate with you listening, or it may be something new, or maybe some useful information, because at this point in time, in the world we live in, with more remote workers, with more systems overall, we are in a fully data-fied world, especially in HR. And that means we need to be able to make sense of data. So we'll start by looking at what we have to do, because our annual report is very data-centric. In fact, it really stands out among its peers and is considered the premier and most reliable source of HR tech data. And the reason why is not just because of the sheer quantity of data, although that is important, but because we spend so much time cleaning, vetting, and validating our data. And a lot of that work comes from Tammy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is, to me, data is my life, right? So I spend all my time in spreadsheets and collecting data and honing that whole process. So to me, this is a fascinating topic, but I absolutely will respect that it's not everyone's favorite topic. But at the end of the day, Cliff, it's what gives people the ability to do their jobs and do it well. And so that's kind of what fuels me, is this need to collect and distribute clean, accurate data that can help anyone in any size company make decisions to do their job better. So as boring as data can be, it is a really important part of our world.
Yes. And I think it really, I think one thing everyone can agree on is we'd rather make decisions based on data, to make evidence-based decisions rather than just what we think might be right, what's worked in the past. We all agree that we need data, but it can't just be any data. We need to be able to make sure we're looking at the right data, that we're looking at the data that, that it's telling a story, right? The data needs to tell a story, and we need to be able to see that story. So, Tammy, would you be able to give an example of what it means to sort of start with a kind of just pile of data and make it into something meaningful?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about this. When we launched and collected data for this 2022 survey season, which was a little over 2 months long, we recorded over 5,000 responses, Cliff. And, I think that sounds amazing, right? People are like, what? You could get 5,000 responses? Well, don't get too excited, because if you look at our final number, we only kept 2,515. And, that process is something that takes a lot of time and effort to kind of hone. We utilize Qualtrics for our survey and, as a platform, and they have some built-in tools that help us kind of do our job, that flag some of those responses. One of the great tools that they have is the, reCAPTCHA score technology, which, tells me whether or not at the likelihood of it being a human versus a bot taking the survey. So those kind of things are really helpful.
That reCAPTCHA, that's the one where you look at, you say, I'm not a robot, or you look at pictures. Is that what that is?
Oh, yeah. I guess it's a similar technology, but it's behind the scenes and it's looking at a number of metrics within the response. And it's going to score it with a number. And the number's likelihood, the better the score, the more likelihood that it's a human. So it's a really nice feature within the tool that we are able to use. But boy, again, those crafty spammers, we'll talk about that soon.
Yeah, so actually, I think it's a perfect segue, because even if you are, and I mean you, the listener, are working on data and are trying to, think about, all right, how do I know that the data that's been given to me is valid? There's, a sort of number of best practices, and maybe you don't have, that Q reCAPTCHA tool, but you can still, especially with smaller data sets, you can literally just sort of eyeball it. But let's start from the top, Tammy, because I know you, being a data person, you have a much more structured approach to these things. And I think that people would be wise to listen to your process.
Oh, well, thanks. I think anyone who's collecting data and or using data should know that there's this basic steps of data collection. And, it really should start out with having a well-defined game plan for, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to collect? What is it that your data needs to receive? And so to do that, you have to work as a team. It's one of the big things we do here is we sit down every year in January and February, and we just start planning. And we start figuring out what it is that we need to capture for our clients and for our data set, so that we have year-to-year data, as well as, our emerging tech section. Is it capturing everything that's new? So I think the number one step in any data collection is always having that game plan well defined, followed very, right behind with monitoring it. So when we launch our data or our survey, it has to be monitored, right? I'm looking at the dashboard. I'm looking at things as the responses are coming in. I'm looking for spammers. I'm looking for anomalies. Is the platform we're using recording everything properly? That's an important part of it.
And again, for you at, again, it may be a smaller business or kind of getting started this can be as simple as, how quickly did a person get through it? Is it 5 seconds for them to fill the whole thing? Well, you can, if you have that ability to see how quickly someone filled out a form, then that's probably not valid. Everything is the first option, probably not valid.
Absolutely, Cliff. That is one of the columns that I'm always looking at is, if you've taken our survey, it can be extensive and long.
Although we allow people to opt out of sections.
Absolutely. So thanks for bringing that up. But I will absolutely look at how many seconds it takes you to take our survey. And yeah, I'm probably not going to think you're a real valid taker if you only spent, 120 seconds in the survey and you've clicked complete. So yes, that is definitely some of the practices that we use for kind of vetting an answer. So yeah, I mean, we're also going to look for assessing of multiple responses, right? Did the same person take it more than once? Now, in our particular survey, we do see that often, right? Is that someone might, and because it's a lengthy survey, I might have someone start it and then leave it, and then they can't find where they took it again. So they start it again. So I'm always looking for those, folks that are legitimately started it a second time because they couldn't find the first response. And I'm also looking for, those subject matter experts within an organization. Our survey is extensive. And so many times within an organization, you'll have 4 or 5 different employees taking different sections of our survey. Well, all of that has to be flagged, right? That's not duplicate. That's not garbage. That is truly data we want to capture. And we have to flag it to merge together for later. Some other things are watching for missing data. There's a lot of data out there, right, Cliff, that is public knowledge. If you didn't take the time to fill it in where your headquarters for your organization is, that's data that's public knowledge that can be added to make our data so much more robust.
That's right. And again, for anyone that's out there, there's also publicly available data that you can use as a benchmark against your own. The Bureau of Labor Statistics immediately comes to mind.
Yeah.
And say, our turnover rate, is that sort of off for the United States, or is that normal? It's very rough, but there's other data sources that are out there that may help you when you're trying to make sense of the data that you've pulled in for whatever purpose. So go out there and take a look, or reach out to organizations like ours that have data.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're also, when we're cleaning, we're looking for those outliers, right? We're looking for not only that missing data, but we're looking for just outlandish kind of responses. And again, nothing gets deleted straight at its face value until it's been flagged and then reviewed. And that brings me to, as part of this process, validate, validate, validate. I cannot say that enough. The validation process, we'll talk about it, I think, in a few minutes, but it has to happen, and it's for data to be collected and trusted. And then there's that last, I guess this is my own methodology. I don't know if other data people feel the same way, but never think you're actually done with cleaning. It brings to mind this crazy keep cleaning, this commercial from scrubbing bubbles in the 80s. And yes, now I'm aging myself. I am an 80s kid. Their motto was, we do the work so you don't have to. And as a research and data analyst, that's my job, right? To clean the data so that you can trust it, which is Sapient's number one goal with our data, is trust.
Yeah, and I think it should be everyone's number one goal. The old expression is trust arrives on foot and flees on horseback, meaning that once you lose the trust, it's really hard to get it back. So you're like, well, I think this is good enough. And then someone sees something. They're not going to trust anything you bring to them again, not for a very long time. And you need to be able to make very important decisions. This could involve people's jobs. Always remember how important this data is. That doesn't mean you should be, scared of using the data. But like Tammy said, never assume that what you've got is 100% perfect. Just make sure you've hit all the obvious things. And what you'll need to do, and we're going to also talk about this later, I feel like we keep teasing later sections here, is to work with others, because not everyone will look at the data the same way. But we'll get to that, because let's talk a little bit more about that validation, because you obviously hit on that in triplicate. So it's extremely important.
Yes, absolutely. And like you were just alluding to, using your past and current industry knowledge to know what is going on in the industry and utilizing other departments. I cannot stress this enough. Within the organization, you want to use the folks from different parts of your business, their knowledge base, their years in industry. It's priceless, really. Teamwork is the dream work. All right, I'll stop with that cheesy slogan. But no, seriously, the number of times I've reached out to you, Stacy, Terry, Susan, Lisa, and that's all the different departments here at Sapient, just to ask, hey, what's your take on this response? What would you imagine you would see in this industry from this size client? Because I don't want to discount anyone. I don't know, exactly what the situation is at a company, but it just makes sense to me that to validate responses, you would use all the resources you have at your fingertips.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes people can make when they think about data is that it's just numbers, but it really isn't. It's a story, it's a narrative, it's interpretation. We think, well, 2 + 2, it's 4, but it can mean a bunch of different things depending on how you're looking at it. One of the things that we often recommend for larger organizations, it's kind of what you just mentioned, pulling people in from different departments and getting their viewpoint on it. If you're at a much larger organization, real best practice is to set up a data council, because, if you can all get together and you can pull someone from, operations, from finance, from IT, from HR, when you are setting up things like common data definitions. Everyone you're going to find out has a different definition of something as simple, something you might think is simple, like headcount. Because some people will go, well, do contingent workers count? Do
Right.
part-time workers count? Do people that we know are being released soon count? Or, a million different things that everyone's going to think differently about. And that's just headcount. Imagine getting into something like return on investment or something a little more complicated. So by doing that, by pulling people in from different perspectives, you're able to not only get better groundwork with your data definitions, your rules for access, your security, storage, where you're going to keep things, but also you start to realize the interpretations of that data come through. And also you create trust because all those different people that are on that council, they had input and now they will trust that data because they know what went into it. So I think it's just really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point, Cliff. And if a company is able to have that kind of a setup and that kind of teamwork with the data that they're collecting and managing, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. You're doing everything you can to sort of combat what could be bad data out there. Now that may come from things as simple as, like you said, someone didn't fill something out. But there's another problem that you may run into if you're doing something like we do. If you're reaching out to large groups, especially external to your organization.
Yeah.
And Tammy, I know you're going to shudder when you hear it, but it's the spammers.
Oh my word, spammers. They haunt my dreams. Spammers. And they have just gotten so crafty.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that you could tag a spammer straight up because they'd start a survey and it would go off the rails within the first couple questions. And so it was just easy, right? You just skim them right out of there, but not anymore, Cliff. These spammers are crafty and elusive. If you look at the fact that we kept, probably it is actually just about half of our original responses. It shows you, and let me tell you, those were not like, oh, just whack out 1,000 of them, gone. It was line by line item at some points because spammers will come in and they will just put the data in that they think you want to see, and they're crafty about it now. It's not just, I don't know, these folks have way too much time on their hands, Cliff. I don't know about you, but I never feel like I have enough time, and these folks must have time. So,
just shows how valuable our survey is, right? That they're willing to spend that time to get a copy of it rather than
yeah, absolutely, right? Because that's one of the things, right? What entices spammers? Maybe it's an incentive of getting the data. Maybe it's an incentive of getting a gift card. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's an incentive of just having your voice heard. I don't know, but I would love to interview some spammers just to see what it is that they have going on in life or how do they time manage their lives that they have time to just sit around and spam.
We'll see about next week in 2 weeks on spilling the tea if we can get a spammer in.
Yeah, exactly. Just interview a spammer.
What sort of things are you seeing from spammers?
Oh, yes. So some of the ways we scrub our data for spamming, we have to look at all the responses, that fall outside of the normal response category, which, when you say the word normal has gotten so convoluted maybe or unacceptable. I don't really know where to go with that word, but that's that first step in the general best practices, right? Is a well-defined game plan for what you're expecting your data collection to look like and your responses to be within a certain industry. Well, when you have that well-defined, it does make spamming pop out at you better, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like some of the examples, oh gosh, let's see. If a respondent has, this is a good one, actually. So if you tell me that you're a, company of 150 employees and you have a payroll service in use, but you select all 50 plus vendors, I'm probably going to not believe you. Yeah. Because that means you've literally paid for, implemented, and are now using 50 plus different payroll services. Now, we do see often many different size companies utilizing a few different vendors for their different services, right? I mean, that's a pretty normal thing. If it's been a smaller company, sometimes is actually utilizing what we would typically call a larger scale headcount. That just might be that the smaller company was acquired by the larger company, and now they're utilizing what the larger company has on their payroll, right? Has on their tools and their tool base. So, we see that kind of stuff. But that's one big flag for me as I'm going through it, is looking at that. Another one would be if you answer all the open-ended questions with the same response. I'm also going to flag that, right? That's going to be flagged, because how is it that you can feel happy and criticize something with the same words? I'm not often able to do that. Oh, another one is also the NA. When you see NA across the boards, across, 13, 14 different questions, you think to yourself, what are they doing? Oh, this is a good one. How about the emails, Cliff? Like, we now that we're talking behind the scenes, this is kind of a fun one. If you've given me a valid email, which, it's not really hard to do, to create a valid email, but if you give me a valid email with a series of letters and numbers and it doesn't match your contact info,
I see.
I'm going to flag you, right? And rightly so. But also, if you give me an email with a, somewhat inappropriate email address, probably going to flag you. And yes, we do get a handful of those inappropriate emails. So I do appreciate that the spammers have a sense of humor, and they make my job difficult but entertaining at the same time, And I could go on and on about these spammers. I mean, the simple bots, they nail you. You see it come through. It's going to have the same, those are duplicates, really, right? Those are going to come through 40, 50 responses, all tagged to the same contact. And those flags are easy to see and get rid of. But it's the ones, the one-liners that come through with just garbage data, right? And it's our job to go through and scan those out and skim them off the top and make sure that garbage does not end up in our final data set.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I do want to point out, because I know we have some Minnesota listeners who are clearly going, wait a second, I can be nice and criticize something at the exact same time.
Or Canadians, thank you, Canadians, for your kindness, I guess.
Yep, that's right.
I generally come from New England, so we're a little bit harsher in our terms. If I'm criticizing, you're probably going to know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing to think about when you are the person creating a survey or collecting data from some other source, if you have made a question, if you have asked for a response and you are getting somewhat weird responses, but it's happening more often than you really think it should, I would suggest also don't just assume spammers. Take a look at the way you phrased it. You may have inadvertently asked a question in a way that is a little more vague than you realized, or you knew what you meant and they didn't necessarily, right?
Oh,
You say, who's your payroll company? And they go, what, now? Or any of them at any time?
Yes.
That's why we're specific of, who has been your primary payroll company, in the last 24 months, or who's it right now, or something like that. Think about those type of things.
Yes,
when
for
you're
sure.
creating it.
And you know what, Cliff? We don't always get it right ourselves. And you're right. When we see those kind of odd kind of responses coming in, that directly goes into our program planning for the next year, right? Our game plan for the next year is, oh yeah, question 12 in the payroll section needs to be better defined, because, and another part of that is why it's so important on the beta side of, when you write a survey, man, don't be afraid to share it with, and really importantly, share it with people outside of your own department, because typically Cliff and I have already talked about this. We already know what we're looking for the responses. So we're not going to see the oddity in the phrasing of a question, where if I give it to someone over in, say, the marketing department, and they don't even know, they're not even aware that we even asked this question, they're going to look at it differently. And they might even be like, I don't even know what you're asking. And so getting those outside opinions and point of views and really beta testing a survey before you put it out there. makes my life so much easier on the data cleaning side. Because you're right. When you get those odd responses, it's really just, it slows me down, right? It's going to slow me down in the cleaning process, and anyone else it would slow down. So that's a great point, Cliff.
Yeah, and I think, as we're sort of wrapping up here, I think the overall lesson, and you may differ, so I'll be curious to hear, is that many people find working with data daunting, especially if this is new to them. They're thinking, listen, I don't know how to run these numbers. I don't have these programs. I don't know what a p-value is, and that's fine, by the way. But that's not generally what you need. The skill in data and using data is sort of interpreting it and finding the story that it's telling. It seems strange, but it's like that scene from The Matrix where the guy's just looking at all the green numbers going up, and he's,
Yes.
that's that thing, that's that. That's what's really happening. And I don't mean it to sound like you need some sort of, weird mathematical abilities. If you start seeing patterns, or you start seeing strange things, you start noticing trends, the ability to sort of play around and go, well, what has changed? What has changed that's making this department keep losing headcount? And then say,
Right.
okay, well, if we institute new policies, if we change systems, whatever the case may be, it is always worth not selling yourself short. When you think about data, think about it in terms of storytelling. I definitely agree. Trust. It's a lot of these emotions we don't normally associate with data, but I think are the most important ones in there.
Yeah, Cliff, I think you hit the nail on the head there. When you're, and this has been a process for me to learn, because I really have been focused in all my years on data and data collection and the numbers and the impact of what the quantity of achievable outcomes that can come from the data. But it's really all on spreadsheets, and it's all numbers. And what I love that you said it, it's telling its story, right? It's not about what
That's right.
I'm not trying to tell my story. I needed to tell its story. What did the data tell me? And that all just pours right into that trust, right? Trust is so important when it comes to the data. And when you get it right, it's amazing. I love doing what I do, and I love sharing data, with other people. And I so many people discount it. You're right, and I just can't, because I think it's actually fascinating, the story that the data tells, when I don't try to manipulate it to what I want it to tell.
That's
Let
right.
it tell its story, and then ride from there. It's fun. It's fun, people. You should join me in the data world.
That's right. Well, you always get to tell the data story. In our last couple minutes here, what is Tammy's story? Is there any fun little fact? You mentioned being from New England. I also moved down here from New England, and I don't want to make any of our Midwest or Minnesota listeners feel bad, because I always tell this story that someone told me moving from LA to Boston. The best expression I ever heard going from those was that in LA, everybody is friendly and no one is your friend. And in New England, nobody is friendly and everyone's your friend.
Well, and coming from New England and now living in North Carolina, I'll just say, bless your heart, Cliff, bless your heart. I've learned that covers a multitude of sins in all ways. But no, in all honesty, data has been a part of my grown-up life for a long time. I started in the radio frequency industry back when Nextel was a thing, and I was a radio frequency engineer for them. And a lot of that job was about gathering data. And you could gather data until you're blue in the face, but what do you do with the data, right? And so from that avenue, I went into teaching and did a whole lot of teaching, not on data, just teaching, and had years in that field where I was able to, gather data on a daily basis. And then what did I do with it again? How did I use the data? And so now it's kind of culminated with this work that I'm doing in this field for Sapient Insights. And I just find it all fascinating that my life has brought me here, and that I'm able to use these skills over the last, 30 years of my life to maintain a job that gathers data and tells its story. And I didn't even know a company like Sapient did this kind of thing until I got looking. And so it really is just simply fascinating to me. So hopefully we haven't bored you all too much and that you're interested in more of this data talk. I'd love to come back and talk more. Send questions. We'd love it.
That's right. They can reach you at
Tammy at sapientinsights.com or research.
Tammy with a Y.
Tammy with a yes, thank you. TAMMY at sapientinsights.com or simply research at sapientinsights.com. We'll come to our team, but if you have any further questions about our methodology or where we're headed in the future, feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I think we're going to wrap up, and this is a quick reminder for our listeners. Next episode, we'll be back with our regular format and some piping hot English breakfast tea that we are very excited to share with you. And a reminder, you can access the full 2022-2023 annual report from our website at sapientinsights.com. It is a free download in celebration of our 25th anniversary, a savings of, and I looked this up, unlimited value. So very important. If you are interested in getting in-depth data or support for your own company's HR strategy journey, you can drop us a line at info@sapientinsights.com to schedule some time to chat. And you can sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on research launches, where we'll be speaking or visiting, and when you can participate in our annual survey. And thank you, Tammy. Thank you to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcasts, run by their amazing founder, Kelly, and our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Zoe Britton. And thank you, most of all, to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. That is it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week.